Morning.
Morning. Good morning, Rabbi Steinberg. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you so much for making the time for this. I really appreciate it.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was so difficult to pin down.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. Your name came up on episode two, and I think with the published ones, we're up to 36 now.
Wow.
So, yeah, so I've been after you for a while. I'm sorry
Oh,
for my stalking.
sorry. It worked.
So
It worked. I'm sorry. I'm not usually this difficult.
that's fine. That's fine. I really appreciate it. With all that being said, maybe you can give me a little bit of your background when you approached the Jewish Center. Were you a rabbinic intern there? Did you start off there? Was that your very
Yeah, yeah. So I was in my fourth year of smicha, and I'd actually done a rabbinic internship in Birmingham, Alabama, with Rabbi Abi Schmidman, and I wasn't planning to do another internship, but Rabbi Shmuel Hain came over to me in the base Midrash and said, Yossi, we're looking for a rabbinic intern at the Jewish Center. Are you interested? So I happened to be living on the Upper West Side at the time. It was kind of a local stop. So I said, happy to apply. I became the intern. I stayed the intern for 2 years. Learned from Rabbi Dr. Ari Berman, who continues to be a mentor of mine. Rabbi Shmuel Hain, who had been the assistant rabbi for a couple of years, took a position in Riverdale. The Jewish Center said, Yossi, would you like to be the assistant rabbi? I said, sure. And then the next year, Rabbi Berman took a year sabbatical and decided to stay in Israel. So I've been at the Jewish Center ever since.
wow? So tell me a little bit about how it differed from your position in Alabama. I mean, you can't think of two separate distinct worlds than Alabama and Upper West Side, but
Yeah, I'm not
tell.
sure if there was anything that was actually the same. Birmingham, Alabama. So I actually had thought that I would be the rabbi of a small town kind of shul where everybody could know each other and people would know if you're missing and some guest walks in and everyone would recognize them. And that's something that happens in smaller suburban communities and happens less in larger urban communities. So the Jewish Center is a whole matrix and a complex with lots of different minyanim and lots of different demographics. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of the polar opposite from a place like Birmingham.
Yeah. Did it ever occur to you to maybe stay in Birmingham?
So there wasn't a position. There was no Havamina that I was going to stay in Birmingham. I had a wonderful rabbi, and he remained there for a number of years. But it was really for me a chance to get a sense of what a small town Jewish community would be like.
Yeah. So what was it like entering into the I don't want to use the word cathedral, but the for, more formal, larger complex that is the Jewish Center and with a rich history of it. How did, if you can throw yourself back there 20 years, what was that like for you?
So there's a lot of imposter syndrome, standing at the pulpit of the Jewish Center. So you're standing at the pulpit where Rabbi Young stood and Rabbi Lamm and more recently Rabbi Schacter, Rabbi Berman, and every gadol and every amazing Jewish personality over the past 100 years has, stood at some point at that pulpit. So it was intimidating to be sure for a while. And
How
I was just going to say, I think what made it less intimidating is just knowing that I had, the support of my wonderful teachers and mentors behind me.
yeah, and how old were you at the time?
So I was 27 when I became the intern, and then when Rabbi Berman left for Israel, I think I was 30.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's how old Rabbi Schacter was when he assumed the role as well.
Yeah, I think we say that all the Jewish Center rabbis started at 30. There might be one exception, but pretty much everyone.
Uh-huh. And so, before you assume the role, just as the rabbinic intern, and then the how that developed into becoming the assistant rabbi, how was the experience of getting the sermon there for the first time? Do you remember what it was like?
So I actually do remember my first sermon as the rabbinic intern in the main sanctuary. Um, and Rabbi Lamm is sitting in the audience, so that's quite intimidating. But I think I remember Rabbi Berman saying something to me like, Yossi, everybody's rooting for you, and that made it easier to get up there. But as a kid, and what did I know? I didn't know anything.
Yeah. And so, is there a specific style of sermon that the Jewish Center differs from let's say, your mainstream shuls? I've heard, obviously, it's a bit more formal. There's higher expectations. I've heard people even line up afterwards to kind of critique your usage of vocabulary and grammar and all sorts of things. So, what was how did you gear up for that first sermon?
So I'll say a couple things. One is I had the benefit of hearing Rabbi Berman on a regular basis. I had the benefit of being able to read a lot of Rabbi Lamb's sermons. I had the benefit of being able to speak to Rabbi Lamb on a regular basis and kind of download from him the wisdom of what's involved in preparing for a sermon. And there's a style, there's a cadence to the sermons at the Jewish Center. We write out our sermons, even if we don't say every word on the page. There's, as you said, a formal structure, and there's a expectation that every word is going to be measured and every word is going to be carefully chosen. So it's not to say you can't be extemporaneous, but it is to say that there's an expectation that it's going to be tight. There's going to be a solid argument, and there's going to be some take home message which is going to relate to the moment in time.
Was that difficult for you to absorb that style? Did it conflict with the way that you had approached the drasha slot?
It's a great question. So it was a learning curve. I had always had a kind of allergy to um, written speeches. People in academic contexts who get up and read a paper. I'm like, if I wanted to read the paper, I would read the paper. But this is not a reading. This is a fill in the blank. This is a talk. This is a speech. This is a sermon. So why are we reading? So, I did come to appreciate that the exercise of writing out every word and choosing every word and formulating what it is that you're trying to argue ahead of time is a real value for lots of reasons. And then coming to appreciate that you could write it out and you could have it in front of you and you can go off script. And there's a happy balance where you can really have the best of both worlds, the sense of it's all prepared, nothing is left to chance, and you could be extemporaneous and relatable.
Did you commit to memory? Did you try to memorize what you wanted to say? Is that how it worked? Once you had it written down?
So I wouldn't say commit to memory, like not quite that far, but I'd practice a bunch of times and take ownership over it so that the words came out just the way they're supposed to come out. But no, I don't think I ever got quite to the level of memorizing the thing.
Yeah. And how long did it take you in the beginning to I guess, prepare and rehearse? How long did you prepare in the early days?
So I don't know if there was like a number that I had in mind, but it was a process that started early in the week, and then once I quote unquote finished the drasha, I would practice a bunch of times.
Did you ever feel that when you got up to the pulpit, that maybe you didn't have what it took that Shabbos morning to pull it off? Did you ever feel that way?
There's certainly times I felt like maybe this isn't up to snuff, or something happened between the time I wrote it and the time that I was giving it, where I was like, I'm not sure this is as relevant as it was 4 days ago when I was thinking about it. So certainly feelings like that have crept in.
Yeah. And so I'm curious, what are some of the things that stand out in your mind, that the wisdom you said that you downloaded from Rabbi Lamb? What are some of the things that stuck with you?
So I'll share a few pieces that have stuck with me for a long time. I once asked him, I said, do you have favorite Perushim? Do you have favorite Svarim that you use that inspire you to think about the themes you're thinking about when you prepare a drasha? And he said, I'm like a cigar smoker. And every year I have a different sefer, I have a different perush that I look at. And that sort of was part of a theme that he always encouraged, which is learn and read widely, and there has to be a breadth that will inspire you, and you never know which piece is gonna be relevant, which piece is gonna hit you, but the breadth I think was a very important piece that he always encouraged. Um, something else he always said was, he was a very funny man. He had an amazing sense of humor and a very quick wit. And he used humor often when he gave a drasha, when he spoke, when he taught. But he always cautioned. He says, you have to have like an ema de tzibura. It's not a comedy club. This is a shul. This is a base medrash, whatever the context is, and that should infuse the content of what's happening here. So you could say something funny, you could tell a joke. That's all fine. But there's a line, right? And don't cross over that line where the humor becomes the ikar, and it should never approach that. Use it selectively, and just remember Dalif name Miyata made, like who your audience is and what you're there to do. So those are a couple pieces that I think about often.
Yeah. Did he ever give you any constructive criticism on any of your drashas, or did you seek him out?
Yeah, yeah, all the time. So sometimes he would just come over to me, after shul or at mincha, and say something about something he liked or something he thought I could do better. And sometimes I just called him after Shabbos and said, Rabbi Lamm, can we make a time to meet? And he always said, of course, come over. It'd be my pleasure.
Did you ever like hold your breath when you saw him coming, thinking like, "Uh-oh, like here's
Often, often. I think there was one. I think it was the first time that I was giving. It must have been like the Shabbos Shuva Drush. It was the first year that I was filling in for Rabbi Berman. It's a big moment, and Rabbi Lamb is sitting there, and he's like listening to every word. And at the end of davening, at the end of the drasha, he comes over and says, Rabbi Levine, I just want to congratulate you on a job well done. I didn't know you had it in you. So he told it like it was.
that's great. That's wonderful. And I'm curious also where you draw from. So with this kind of formal presentation, where do you feel a need to draw from a lot of secular sources that kind of maybe speak to the sensitivities of the crowd in front of you, literature, art, science, maybe different secular sources? How I'm not sure it's not like like a cookbook, a dash of this, a dash of that. But do you find that you need to keep certain proportions of Torah and secular sources in your drasha?
So that's a great question. I think when I first started, I thought more about that question, and I felt like there had to be some balance, and I would catch myself if it was too academic or if there was too much learning and not enough of the contemporary or the secular sources, as you say. And I think now I feel less compelled to be restricted by those kinds of calculations. So sometimes I'll get up and I'll give a drasha, and we're just learning. Like it just ended up being there was an argument about a particular sugya, and we learned it together, and it became a drasha. And there are other times where there's something really important going on in the world, and there's a piece from the parsha that I want to develop an argument from, and some big portion of the sermon becomes about some contemporary issue. So I'm kind of open to wherever the drasha leads, depending on what the needs of the moment are.
Mhm. And I'm trying to recall. I think Rabbi Haynes said that the structure, the actual architecture of the shul, makes it a little bit difficult to feel intimate, a certain type of intimacy. It's more formal. And do you find it difficult, or at least in the past, maybe did you find it difficult to connect with, maybe you were like the sage on the stage, and they're they're in the pews there. Was that something that was difficult for you to overcome, or how did you navigate that?
So I'd say a couple of things. One is Jewish Center members are a special group, and part of what makes them special is that they really care. Like there's 100 other places they could be on any Shabbos morning. If they're in the main sanctuary of the Jewish Center, they came because they care about the davening, they care about the learning, they care about the drasha, they're interested. So I actually find that I have to work much less hard than some of my colleagues to kind of grab the attention of the people in the pews. The people in the pews are listening, and they're interested. That being said, I always try to use kind of the arrows in my quiver to keep them interested. And just because it's a big room doesn't mean there can't be audience participation. Sometimes we'll throw out a question and say, Steve, what do you think? Or, Jane, I see your hand is up. Tell me your thoughts. And that's a nice way to keep people involved and to keep it kind of alive. And again, there are lots of kind of quivers, lots of arrows in that quiver that one can use to keep people's attention. But more than happy to talk about some of those later.
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like you kind of put an effort into making it cohesive, where maybe the natural environment itself doesn't lead to that unity and cohesiveness of everybody in the crowd. What's the largest crowd you've ever spoken to in the shul?
There's only so many seats in the shul, so I think there's 500 seats or something like that in the shul, and then the fire marshal starts to tell us that we're in violation of some code.
So does it feel intimidating when, let's say it's a Kol Nidre or a Rosh Hashanah sermon? Does it when you are looking out into that sea of people and there's so many people there, and there's a lot of probably new faces that you don't see all year round. What kind of feelings does that evoke in you?
So, I come back to the Ema Ditzibura of Rabbi Lamm, and there always has to be a sense of, there's something that these people are expecting of you, and you want to deliver, and you want to get it right. I'll share with you a secret about the Jewish Center, which is there are more people in the Jewish Center on Parshas Lech Lecha than there are on Rosh Hashanah. It's a funny phenomenon because so much of our volume is generated by young people. When it comes to Yontif, the young people go home, they go to their families. Not all of them, but so many of them do that your average Shabbos, in November is actually busier than a lot of your Yontif moments in the main sanctuary of the Jewish Center.
Wow, I never would imagine that. Yeah. And so besides Rabbi Lamm and Rabbi Berman, did you have any other mentors or any inspirations or models, maybe rabbis that you draw from when you were growing up, that influenced your speaking style?
Yeah, so my first teacher was my father. He was a very talented public speaker, and he always made it his business to make sure that his kids and his nieces and nephews and his grandkids, were the beneficiaries of the wisdom that he had when it came to oratory as a general matter. So he was my first teacher.
What line of work was he in? What did he?
He's an ophthalmologist, but he came from a generation where doctors also had an expansive liberal arts education. So that was very core and remains very core to his identity. So he's a natural teacher, whether he's talking about science or anything else, and that was a big influence on me growing up. Actually, Rabbi Norman Lamb's brother, Rabbi Maurice Lamb, was the rabbi of Beth Jacob congregation when I was a little kid, and I have a few memories of his speaking. Rabbi Elazar Muskin was the rabbi of the Young Israel of Century City, and remains the rabbi of the Young Israel of Century City, where I spent most of my childhood, had my bar mitzvah. So I certainly hear his voice, and I also credit him because he gave me a number of opportunities over the course of, let's say, high school to teach and to speak, and those were formative moments. And I would also, of course, be remiss if I didn't mention Rabbi Schacter, who's been a mentor of mine for over 20 years, sometimes implicitly, sometimes explicitly. And then there are people from afar who I think about when I speak. People like Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who only met and heard a handful of times in his lifetime, but whose words and whose diction and whose cadences echo in my mind often.
Yeah. So how do you, after 20 years, how do you stay fresh and improve and keep on top of your game when you have this kind of formal boundary of the type of drasha that you're expected to give?
Mm. So it's a great question. I'll say a few things about that question. One is, as a general matter, I try not to speak every single Shabbos, because I think when you speak every single Shabbos, it's very hard to come up with something new and something fresh all the time. So we always try to break it up. And if once a month there's a guest speaker or a scholar in residence or the assistant rabbi or the resident scholar, or even on my own schedule, so maybe there's 4 straight Shabbos. So one of them I'll do a shiur or a public lecture, something to break it up, not just for the listeners, but for the person preparing the material as well. So that's one piece. The second is I always try to keep one toe in the academic world. That's just my personal interest. I think a number of my mentors have articulated some kind of rule that says, the rabbinate can't be the only thing you do. You have to have some other thing. So maybe it's educational, maybe it's political, maybe it's academic, whatever it is. And I think whatever that other thing is can also be a source of inspiration for what happens in a drasha. So I'm always reading and researching and writing about Jewish history, and I don't always talk about Jewish history, but it certainly adds depth and perspective to a lot of what goes on in my preparation for drushos. And then the last thing I'll say also comes back to Rabbi Lamb's advice, which is just to keep reading widely. So every year I change my subscription and add or subtract or change some new journal or some new magazine, or 5 of them that might be provocative and might inspire me to think in new ways about material that we've talked about in the past.
Yeah. I'm curious also about some of the feedback maybe you got in the beginning, not necessarily from Rabbi Lamm, but maybe just from the congregants. How they because there's this. It seemed to me, at least from the outside, that there's this expectation of the sermon. It's the highlight of one of the highlights of the Shabbos morning, and that people feel comfortable approaching the rabbi afterwards and kind of critiquing, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively, and that's part of the routine. And I'm curious, like maybe some of the more memorable feedback that you got over the years.
So the membership of the Jewish Center is a treasure trove. I mean, we have members who are just like the most thoughtful, most accomplished, leaders in their respective fields. And they just want to help, and they just want to make things better. So when they offer critique, when they offer feedback, it's only because they have so much pride in the Jewish Center. Like, well, it could be even better if we did X, Y, and Z. So 99.99% of the time, that's where it's coming from, and it makes it very easy to absorb and assimilate when you know that, well, this is just your best friend, and they just want you to succeed and be the best you could possibly be. And they might have 50 years experience public speaking, like they can help you. So who wouldn't want that? Um, so I feel like I've been the beneficiary of a lot of wonderful members who are just interested in sharing their wisdom. One of them is a man named Ted Comet, who please God next month is turning 100. He's in shul just about every Shabbos. He's a Jewish communal professional, spent decades and decades running the JDC. Amazing life experiences and amazing stories. And I meet with him pretty regularly, and just share one great technique that he'd always say. So we'd meet for let's say an hour, and we'd talk about whatever was on my mind, whatever on his mind, and then in the last 5 minutes he'd say, "Okay, Yossi, what did we talk about? What did you learn, and what are you taking away from this meeting?" I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't take notes. I have to go back and write everything down. Give me a second. Let me organize my thoughts." And it's a great model for how to kind of think about and structure a meeting where someone just wants to offer you wisdom and guidance.
Yeah. Um, I was thinking about the demographics of the shul, and how does the pastoral role over there play a part in your rabbinate, as opposed to smaller communities. The Upper West Side is young professionals. They're busy. They're maybe transient. How do you how much of a percentage of the work that you do is pastoral?
So I don't know that I'm able to quantify it, but
Yeah,
there's a huge percentage of what we do in rabbiing the Upper West Side that is pastoral. One of the big issues that we think about is loneliness. Who's living on the Upper West Side? So you have a lot of people who are just starting out, and they may not have settled yet, and they're alone. You may have people who are starting over, and they're widowed or divorced, and they move to the Upper West Side. Or maybe they've been living here for a long time, and they're alone for another reason. Or maybe they're not literally alone, but they feel alone because the city is so big and anonymous. So we think about those kinds of issues, all the time. And a big proportion of what we do is a kind of implicit or explicit attempt to address that sense of loneliness. And then on top of that, you have the whole gamut of all the other pastoral work that comes up in the life of a big community. People are struggling with challenging relationships, and somebody might be sick, and somebody might be going through a job transition, and somebody might be in a place of financial hardship, and somebody else is struggling with raising their kids, and right on down the line. Um, from one perspective, the job gets easier as you go on because, well, you've done it before and you've seen it before, and now you're more experienced. But at the same time, the job gets much harder because the relationships are much deeper, the relationships are much broader, and there are many more of them. So now I've known this family for 20 years. I know all of the kids and the grandkids and the nieces and the nephews, and we were at three Sheva brachos together, and we had two brises together and a funeral, and right. So the depth of those relationships, makes things much more much more poignant whenever there's a pastoral, moment.
Sure. Do you find that the drasha and the pastoral work that you do kind of there's like a reciprocal relationship between the two that the more that you invest in the kehillah, the more that they're I think there's this phrase people don't care what you know until they know that you care, and that you find that it creates a certain intimacy over a while over time by dealing with people in a much more personal type of way.
Yeah, there's no question. Sometimes I'll be a guest speaker or pop in to give a shiur somewhere, and I only know two people in the room out of however many of the and it feels, I don't say hollow is maybe the wrong word, but there's much less, connectivity because I'm just parachuting in, and who am I don't really know these people, and okay, we're learning together, and that's wonderful. But when I'm in the main sanctuary of the Jewish Center and I look around the room and I see all these people and the layers and layers of life experience and relationship that we've had together, so, the stakes are just so much higher. It's like we're talking about something that we all care about, that we share, and I care about you, and that we care about them, and like the matrix of relationships, the matrices, right? Both sort of person to person when I look out and think about the individuals, and as a kehillah, I think makes everything more resonant.
Yeah. What are your goals for let's say weekly Shabbos drasha? What do you hope to achieve when you get up there?
So I think I usually conceive of the drasha in one of two buckets. It's not binary, of course, but sometimes I'm up there to challenge the tzibur, and I want to give them something to think about. I want to pose a problem and challenge them to think about how we can address it, how we can solve it. And that might be one bucket. And then there's another bucket which I'm not challenging them, I'm comforting them. There's something that people are thinking about. There's something that's going on, and I want them to know that it's going to be okay. I want them to have a sense of perspective. I want them to know why our Masorah, how our Masorah has addressed these issues, and based on how our Masorah has addressed these issues, we can think about them and leave them with a sense of optimism, and leave them with a sense of hope. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but those
Yeah.
are kind of two things that I think about.
It reminds me of that phrase that the role of a preacher is to challenge the comfortable and comfort the uncomfortable, or yeah, something like that. But yeah, so I'm curious also about some of the quivers you mentioned in your that you have techniques that you use to keep people engaged, to be people invested in connected to the drasha. Maybe you could talk about those a bit more.
Sure. Um, so look, there's an old technique, which is to start with something funny, which uh, I think there's a lot of wisdom to that, primarily because humor, talking to a former stand-up comedian, humor builds rapport, right? If you laugh at my joke, it means that we kind of understand each other. And even if we don't know each other, or we don't know each other that deeply, like, oh, he kind of understands what makes me laugh, and so I trust him a little more now. So I think humor is an important piece used judiciously. And the same goes for stories. Everyone loves stories. Everyone relates to stories. Everyone remembers stories. And to the extent that there's again, they can be overused, but to the extent that there's something that's relevant and relatable, um, I think stories can really make a sermon. I mentioned a little while ago, audience participation. Again, just because it's a formal structure doesn't mean that you can't, break it up a little. Sometimes I'll give a handout to the listening audience, and it might be a picture or a source or something that just is a little unexpected and makes things a little different. And then again, kind of pulling from whatever sources one is expert at. So
Hmm.
I happen to study Jewish history. So if I can pull something relevant from Jewish history that I own because I've studied it and I know it and can talk about it with authority, so that will always draw people in. I find that people are always receptive to history is again its own um, source of interest for people, and particularly when it comes from a place of like, oh, somebody really has ownership over that material, that resonates a lot.
Yeah. When you talk about jokes and stories, so where do you pull from? Where are your resources that you go to if you want to open with a joke or if you want to use a story? Are they personal stories? Are they other people's stories? Are they stories that you read?
Yeah, so I would say my sort of rule of thumb is never to um, have a specific template, right? And just to keep it as varied and variable as possible. So sometimes it's I was sitting on the plane and you'll never guess what happened. Sometimes it's uh, Shakespeare once said. Sometimes it's there's an amazing article in Newsweek, and I learned that, right? And sort of everything in between. So I wish there were like one source where, you know, rabbisbestjokes.com or something, but um, it's um, it's a little kind of catch can.
Yeah. I remember reading a couple of Rabbi Lamb sermons, and he had some great jokes in there. And I was always curious where he got them from. And they just seemed perfect for the occasion. And I almost wondered if he made them up because they're so concise and encapsulated the experience that he wanted to convey. I remember there was one where he talked about there was a pledge, a building campaign, and the rabbi was making an appeal, and the wealthiest person in the kehillah raised his hand and he said, "I'll donate $100." And all of a sudden, a piece of tile fell off the top of a plaster or ceiling or whatever, fell on his head. And so he raised his hand and says, "Okay, I'll give 150." And then Rabbi Lamb said, the rabbi looked up and he said, "God, hit him again." And I'm like, where would he find such a thing like that? Where do you have any insight into where he got his his humor and his stories from?
I cannot say I know the answer to that question.
Yeah. Um, Let me ask you about attention spans over the past 20 years. We've had the introduction of the iPhone, and attention spans are just seem to be shrinking at an incredible rate. TikTok, and people have 6 seconds. Every 6 seconds you scroll, and so and you said you're dealing also with somewhat of a younger demographic in the shul now. How do you feel that things have changed over the years, and how do you deal with that?
So that's a big issue. I actually find there's a real difference between Shabbos and the rest of the week. Um, I think when it comes to teaching, the other 6 days of the week, it's an uphill battle, right? Even in the best case scenario, you're always up against people checking their messages and people, zoning out. I don't think we've yet found a way to address those issues. You talk to school teachers and college prof, like everyone is struggling with those issues. But I actually find that on Shabbos, people are kind of in a different mindset. It's not just that they don't have their phones on them, it's that they sort of have mentally committed to being present for as long as they're going to be present. So my drushos tend to be on the shorter side, I think, as a general matter, like 10 to 12 minutes. Um, but when I do something longer, more ambitious, a public lecture or a Shabbos Gadol drasha, and I'm speaking for an hour, people are in it. People are present, even and maybe especially the younger people. So there's something about the Shabbos mindset that might be the last place on earth that we actually have people's attention for more than like 8 seconds.
Yeah, that's amazing. Um, Tell me about October 7th and post October 7th, how you dealt with that in from the pulpit.
So, like everyone, we found out about October 7th on the morning of Shmini Atzeres, and we didn't know that much. I think we heard from our security guard, and then sort of as the morning progressed, we found out more and more about it, and we started hearing like it's a real thing, which was hard for everyone to grasp. But once we heard the word war, once we heard the word hostages, we knew that it was sort of categorically different from, Lahavdil terrorist attack. So, I scrapped my drasha for that morning, and just said something, from the heart. I remember it being quite emotional. Since October 7th, the running joke is kind of, are you talking about Israel this Shabbos or anti-Semitism in the diaspora? It's like those are the only two topics that are on people's minds, um, and I think rightfully, justifiably so. So there's an inherent challenge when you kind of are talking about the same larger topic week in and week out, and to say something new and to say something nuanced and to say something different about it. But that's where we are, and I think that's the challenge. Is not going away anytime soon. I think it's going to be a long haul.
Yeah, I know you said you were on a mission to Israel, and how did you incorporate that when you came back? Reports of what you saw and takeaways for people to kind of comfort them or inspire them.
Yeah, for sure. We've actually done a couple missions. We're doing another one after Pesach. And I always find that the human experiences, like we met this person who told us, those kinds of messages that we can bring back from Israel when we go are the ones that kind of carry the the most weight, because everyone has the source of information that they have, but I feel like they kind of want to know, but what's really happening? And that's the message we hear from everyone who goes on a mission and comes back. They're always so moved and so inspired and so activated. So every one of those trips, it was on a rabbinic mission and then two shul missions and a family trip. Every one of those trips has somehow found its way into a drasha one way or another.
Hmm. How important is it for you that people remember what you say? Do you have that? Is that an expectation of yours? Is it something that you aim for, or do you kind of take it as a given that you know uh, I'm going to drip this in increments over time, and hopefully they'll catch the important parts, but I don't really expect them to remember week to week.
So I think that's a really important question. On one level, I want to say I hope they never remember so that I can go back and say it again. But more seriously, I think there's a happy medium there, which is to say, um, because you're speaking to a group that's largely the same over many times over the course of years, so there is something that you can build. The rabbi of the Jewish Center for 65 years was Rabbi Leo Young, and there's a lot of he died in 1987. There's a lot of people in the shul who remember him, and inevitably, invariably, you'll say, "Oh, Rabbi Young, the three R's." Reverence, righteousness, and Rahmanut. One, like, did he talk about that every Shabbos? Like, why is that what? And people say, no, he didn't talk about that every Shabbos. He talked about a lot of things, but it was a theme that he came back to, often. And so 30 some odd years later, they're still talking about it. And that's stuck with me. I think that much less important that people remember the details, and more important that they remember the broader themes that I hope will animate their thinking and their value system over time. I have one member who has let's just say a special kind of memory. She remembers every drasha that I've ever given. And if ever I come back and return to a theme that I've spoken about in the past, she's also the kindest person in the world. So she'll say something like, Rabbi Levine, that was an even better way to say that message than when you said it in 2009. Thank you for sharing it again. So I always get a little nervous. I just know she's so nice. She's never going to say anything, but she's in the room. So someone is going to remember this, for a long time.
Yeah. I saw that you typed up some of your sermons in the I don't know, the last one that I could find, I think for this parsha was 2017. Do you still commit them to do you record them, or have you stopped doing that? Or
I write down every word of every sermon. I don't always sort of post them or put them out there, mostly because I don't always have time to go back and kind of edit them or fine tune them. But sometimes I do send them around or in an email or post them on the website. And every once in a while they turn into something larger, an article or an op-ed, or is something that goes forward.
yeah. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up. I have a couple of questions that I ask everybody, and then I'll just there's no right or wrong answers; they're just answers. One of them is your pet peeves when it comes to speaking. When you maybe things you see other people do, or that just get under your skin. Any of those that you have?
So I'd say a couple that come to mind. One is the overuse of hand gestures when people are speaking. I find that can be very distracting. Walking around the stage, I find can be very distracting. Judiciously, one turn, one move can actually be useful. But when a person's like getting their 10,000 steps in during the drasha, I think that's a little bit of a problem. And then I think because I've become so accustomed to like getting the diction and the syntax right, when it's just bad syntax and it's just bad grammar, I think that bothers me.
Okay. And your
What's
favorite?
the best answer? What's the best answer you've heard to that question?
People don't like there's one of the things that resonates with me the most is when people will throw out a question, but they don't actually, everyone knows the answer and they're just trying to engage people with the answer. So we'll say something like, and so what's the most important meal of the day, everybody? And everyone will just say breakfast, but you don't actually want to know the answer. You're just using it as a way to engage people. And to me, it just seems very pedantic. That was one of the things that stick out in my mind. I'm trying to think what people don't like. That's the one that resonates the most with me. That's a sermon joke, one of your favorite sermon jokes that you don't mind, throwing out there for posterity.
A sermon joke. Let's think of a sermon joke. Um, a sermon joke that I once told. There's a elderly man on his deathbed. Stop me if you know it. And uh, his wife is baking cookies down in the kitchen, and the smell, the wafts up to the sick bed, and this frail man just near the end of his life gets up on his cane and he comes down the stairs and he's slowly making his way to the kitchen counter where there's this tray of hot cookies on the baking sheet, and he starts very slowly to reach for one of the cookies, and his wife slaps away his hand and says, "Don't touch those. Those are for the Shiva."
Right. I actually have heard that. I've heard different variations of it. The reason I didn't stop you is because my wife and I have an argument about how to end that joke. So, so the version that I heard is that he sends his son to go retrieve the cookies or the meat or whatever it is, the brisket, and then so the way that I've heard it is the way that you said it, which is mom says it's for the shiva, but. But the way that my wife tells it is that Ma says it's for after, like that's the like for after, meaning like it's also zman hayadua, like it's you don't even have to say the shiva, it's just
A
it's
subtler version. Okay.
yeah, yeah. Um, I'll just share with you one very briefly. I don't know. Someone told me this week a very funny one. He said that there was a guy that in the shul that they was the parsha the tochacha. It was either one. Take your pick. And no one they usually they give it to the balkore or maybe they give it to the rabbi, but no one would take it, and no one wanted it. So they offered they paid somebody to actually take the aliyah for the tochacha. So they got up to that point and they were ready to call him up, but he wasn't anywhere to be found. And everybody's looking around and trying to figure out where this guy is. And then all of a sudden he runs in, schwitzing, and comes up. He takes the aliyah, and they said, you had us in a panic. Where were you? He goes, he's like, you think a guy can make a living off one tochacha? I was in 4 different shuls.
That's good. That's usable.
Very funny joke. So the point of that was that I forget who told it to me, but he was saying that it's because it's such a heavy issue. It's a nice way to lighten a transition into talking about it without being overbearing and kind of grim and austere about it. But
Yeah.
so the last question I have for you, which it's one question that's two, which is what are the 2 pieces of advice that you would give to a rabbi that you want to set up for success who's embarking on his career? They could be speaking related, not necessarily, but 2 primary pieces, primary directives that you would instruct him to really put his best foot forward as he embarks on his new career.
Young rabbis, advice for young rabbis.
Yeah. Yeah, the 2 things that kind of float to your mind, and I don't know, maybe you've told this to rabbinic interns in the past, or but the 2 things that really that you feel are most important, most vital for him to take to heart.
Okay, big question. So the first I would say is seek out wisdom. Uh, Sometimes I think young rabbis have this sense that they need to figure it out for themselves, or I don't want to bother people and call them and ask them like my rookie questions. I think it's the opposite. I think the relationships that you build with the mentor, the opportunities you have to hear from people who have done it before, they'll always be thrilled to be sources of wisdom and mentorship. Um, so I think that's a big piece. And then maybe the second related piece is just pick up the phone as often as you can, which is to say, a lot of the decisions that I think I struggled with, or the young rabbis struggled with, um, are uh, struggles that emerge from the failure to appreciate that more information is actually possible. So why is it a struggle? Because I don't know the answer. Well, why don't you know the answer? Because I'm dealing with incomplete information. And so it's so hard to know what to do. And so I'm struggling with what to do. And I don't know how to do it. Okay, but maybe you could gather more information and then it wouldn't be so incomplete. Right. So she never told me so ask her. Right. And there's this sense that like not knowing the answer is going to be a sign of weakness. Like, no, it's going to be a sign of strength. Like you wanted to know more. And again, lots of implications and applications for that piece of advice, but that's something I think about a lot.
So you're saying that when you hit an impasse and you're not sure maybe how to proceed, don't be afraid to gather more information.
Yeah, from the parties involved, from people who may have done it before, from people who are part of the institute, not necessarily your mentor. I think that's a separate point, but from anywhere you could gain the information.
I'm just curious in closing, you mentioned pick up the phone, and I'm curious because you deal with a younger demographic, is email, texting, is phone still the preferable mode of communication for you?
So I think it's actually coming back to wisdom for young rabbis. Actually, it's a pitfall because everyone's looking for a shortcut, so they text and they email. And my sort of rule of thumb is that texting and email is great if you're just exchanging information. It's perfect. We don't need to talk on the phone. I don't need to bother you. You don't need to bother me. We're meeting at 11. We worked it all out. But if there's a discussion to be had, the worst place for that to happen, right, is in a WhatsApp chat or a text message or an email. And I always tell my rabbinic interns, just because somebody texted you or emailed you doesn't mean that they picked the right mode of communication, right? So they texted and said, "My mother's in the ICU. We're not sure if we should, activate the DNR." Like, don't answer that in a text message just because they texted you in a text message. Pick up the phone, like, or go over to the hospital. But like, whatever you do, the answer is not coming in a text message, and that's an important piece to remember. So you don't have
Yeah.
to pick up the phone to schedule the meeting, but you do have to pick up the phone to talk about the DNR.
Right. I love that. That's such a great principle. I'm gonna try to incorporate that. That the exchange of information can happen through a one-sided text, email, but a discussion, a conversation has to happen either face to face or on the phone. Yeah, that makes so much sense. Wow, thank you so much. You really give me some great wisdom and experiences, and I'm very grateful for that for your time. And where should people visit to learn either your Torah or books or anything else that you're working on?
JewishCenter.org. I post a lot of things that I've written. YU Torah. You can find audio of some of the shiurim that I've given and some texts. And please God, at the end of the year, I have a book coming out called Chacham Tzvi Ashkenazi and the Battlegrounds of the Early Modern Rabbinate, published by Littman Library. So hopefully, in the not too distant
Great.
future, we'll have something to
Right.
to read to.
Yeah, good luck with that. Let me know when that's out so we can put a link there to people who want to see it. Okay, that's Rabbi. Keep up the great work, and I'll be in touch.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye.